Alright guys, now that we've learned how to factor a quadratic equation, today we're going to talk about what happens when we graph a quadratic equation. Now, standard form of a quadratic equation is given as y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So a, b, and c are all numbers. A is attached to the term with the x squared, b is attached to the term with an x to the first, and c is just the constant hanging out there by itself. So, in order to graph a quadratic equation, we want it to be in this form because it's easiest to see what we're working with. So, when we graph a quadratic, since it has a degree of 2, it won't come out looking like just a nice clean line. Instead, it's going to create what we call a parabola. And a parabola can either look like this dude here, or it can look like this dude here. So there's two different kinds of parabolas. It's either going to open upwards or open downwards. So we have an example over here on the graph, and it says the graph either opens up or down. Which in this drawing do you think opens up? Well, opens up is gonna kind of look like a smiley face, and the smiley face one is going to be this green one here, which is graph A. And it says which one opens down. That one's going to look like a frowny face here, so that's going to be graph B. So, it says determine if the following graphs open up or down and whether they have a minimum or a maximum value. So on number 1, first of all, they just want to know if this graph opens upwards or if it opens downwards. Well, it looks like a frowny face here, so that's going to mean that it opens down. But the next question wants to know if it has a maximum point or a minimum point. And here's what that means. In every graph, there is a very, very important point. And that point is called the vertex. The vertex is what everything in the graph kind of goes towards. So here, if you look in this graph, the vertex is where the graph changes directions, which is this point on the very top of it. And they want to know if that point is a maximum of my graph, so the biggest that I can get, or a minimum on my graph, so the smallest that I can get. Well, since it's at the top of the graph here, that means my vertex is going to be a maximum point. So let's look at number 2. First, they want to know if it opens up or down. And since this looks like a smiley face here, that means it opens up. And then again, it wants to know if its vertex is a maximum or a minimum point. Well, its vertex is where it changes direction, so I'm going down here, then I change directions, and I go up. So its vertex would be at the very bottom here, which would be a minimum value. So on number 3, this one looks like a smiley face. I'm just pushing buttons all over today. This one looks like a smiley face, so that means it opens up. And its vertex is down here at the bottom, so that means it's a minimum value. On number 4, this one looks like a frowny face, so that means this one opens down. And its vertex again is at the very top, so that means it is a maximum value. Now, to determine if a parabola opens up or down, we actually don't even need the graph. We can figure this out just by the equation. All we need to know is the a value. Now, a friendly reminder, it's y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Now, the a value is the term in front of my x squared value. Now, it tells me if the a value is positive, the parabola is going to open up. So it's going to look something like this. And if my a value is negative, the parabola is going to open downward. So it's going to look something like this. So let's see if we can figure this out just by looking at the equation. So on number 1, I have y equals 2x squared plus 3x minus 6. So I want to know if this guy is going to open up or down. And to do that, all I have to do is find my a value. So the a value is the number in front of my x squared. And since this is positive, that means my parabola is going to open upward. Now again, if you need to sketch a graph, that's definitely okay. It's going to look something like this. So now I want to know if it's going to have a minimum or a maximum value. So its vertex is going to be down here at the bottom, which means it's going to be a minimum value. On number 2, I have y equals negative 3x squared plus 5x plus 10. So I want to identify my a value here, which is negative 3, which means this guy is going to open down. And if it opens down, its vertex is going to be at the top of its graph, so it's going to be a maximum value. On number 3 here, I have y equals 9x squared minus 4x minus 9. So the a value in front of my x squared is positive, which means it is going to open upward. And my vertex is going to be down here at the bottom, so it's going to be a minimum value. On number 4, again, the a value is what we want, and a lot of people see this right here and they say, oh, it's a fraction, that must mean it opens down. Remember, it has nothing to do with what type of number it is. We're just concerned about if it's positive or negative. And since this guy is positive, it opens up, and its vertex is a minimum value. On number 5 here, I've got a negative 2/3, and since it's negative, it opens down, and that means its vertex is a maximum value. On number 8, if you'll notice, our a value doesn't look like it's there, but if you'll remember, that means that it's really just a 1, and that is positive, so it's going to open up, and my vertex is going to be a minimum value. Now that we've learned how to factor and solve, we want to graph them. So the most important point on the parabola is this vertex. Everything is centered around this point. So before you even start graphing, you have to find this ordered pair. Now to find the ordered pair, we need to use this nice little formula here. X equals the opposite of b over 2 times a. That's going to find me the x value of the vertex. And once I find that x value, I can plug it back in and find the y value. So let's do an example together. So it says graph the equation y equals x squared minus 6x plus 4. The first thing I want you to do is identify your a value, your b value, and your c value. Now the a value is the number directly in front of x squared, so that's 1. The b value is the number directly in front of our x to the first, so that's negative 6. And our c value is the constant hanging out here at the end, so that's 4. Now we can use these numbers to find my vertex. So I need to use this formula here, x equals the opposite of b over 2 times a, to find the x value. So first, I need to find the opposite of my b value. Well, my b value is currently negative 6, so if I want the opposite of negative 6, that's going to be a positive 6. Then I want to divide that by 2 times my a value. Now here my a value is 1, so 2 times 1 gives me a value of 2. So I can take 6 divided by 2, and that's going to give me an x value of 3. Now to find my y value, you need to substitute my answer for x back into my original equation to find y. Now remember, when we substitute a number in, every time we see that variable, that's where we put the number. But don't forget, we have to put parentheses around the variable when we substitute it in. So I'm going to have y equals, instead of x squared, I want 3 in parentheses squared, minus 6 times 3, again in parentheses, then plus 4. Now, I am completely aware that we can put this in our calculator, but let's just get a little bit of practice with doing some math in our heads. So follow the order of operations. I can take that 3 squared and get 9, and I can take that 6 times 3 and get 18, and then we're going to want to add it to 4. So 9 minus 18 is negative 9, and then if I add that to 4, I'm going to get a y value of negative 5. So the x value of my vertex is 3, and the y value of my vertex is negative 5. That means the ordered pair for my vertex is 3, comma, negative 5. Now, since we know the vertex, since everything is centered around the vertex, that's going to be the number that we put in the middle of our t-chart, which you guys can see right here. So I'm going to put the 3 here and the negative 5 here. Now something that's important to notate, when you're dealing with quadratics, you can't just find the y-intercept, find the slope, and then count. You actually have to create a t-chart of values. There's not a better way to do it. So when we find the vertex, we're going to put that in the middle, and then I want to make sure that I get numbers that surround this vertex. So Starting from my x value of 3, I'm going to count up 3. So 3 up 1 is 4, up 1 is 5, up 1 is 6, and then I'm going to count down 3. Down 1 is 2, down 1 is 1, down 1 is 0. Now, to find the remaining y values, I need to take these numbers here and substitute them back into my original equation. Now, we did do it by hand on this one up here for the vertex, but here we actually don't need to do it by hand. Instead, I'm going to show you how to substitute it into your calculator. So if we get out our calculator, we're going to substitute every number back in for x with parentheses around it. So let me make my calculator a little smaller so we can see what's going on. Okay, so the first number that we want to substitute back into our equation for x is 0. So that means everywhere I see an x, I want to put a 0 in parentheses. So I'm going to have open parentheses 0, close my parentheses squared, just like it has here, x squared, minus 6 times 0 in parentheses plus 4. So if you'll notice, guys, this equation that I have here in my calculator pretty much looks exactly like this equation here, but instead of an x, I see a 0. So now that I've done all that, I can go ahead and push enter, and that gives me a result of 4. So I can put 4 here for my result for 0. Now I want to do it again for the value of 1. So instead of an x, I want to put a 1 in. But instead of going through and typing that all in again, but with a 1, I can use some functions on my calculator to make it a little bit simpler. I'm going to hit this second button up at the top, and then I'm going to come down here and hit enter, because what that's going to do is bring back my previous entry. And now all I have to do is go back through and edit it. Everywhere that I see a 0, I want to replace it with a 1. Now that's saving me some possibilities for error. By typing in less numbers, I can make sure that I get the correct answer. So now when I hit 0 and I have 1 in there, I get back a result of -1. And now I can do it again for 2. So second, enter, and I'm going to go back through, and everywhere that I had a 1, I'm going to put in a 2. And that's going to give me a result of -4. So now what I'd like you to do is pause the video and put the numbers 4, 5, and 6 back into your equation and get the results. Hopefully when you substituted 4 back in, you got a result of -4, 5 got you a result of -1, and 6 got you a result of 4. Now, at first glance, you might panic, because when you put in 4 and got back -4, I can understand the confusion since we already got a result of -4. But I just want to remind you, this is not a linear equation. We're not going to have a straight line where one answer is going to give us one result every single time. Instead, this is a parabola. And if you'll notice, this result gives you the same as this result. This one is the same as this one, and this one's the same as this one. Like I said, everything surrounds the vertex. The vertex is the most important point. So the two numbers closest to the vertex should be the same, then the next two are the same, then the next two are the same. Now let's see what that looks like when I graph it. So when I graph it, I'm going to start with the most important point. I'm going to start with that vertex. So 3, -5. Now remember, that means you go right 3 and down 5, and you put a point there. Now, I'm just going to pick one side and go for it. I'm going to start with these numbers above here. My next ordered pair is 2, -4, so that's right 2 down 4. And my next ordered pair is 1, -1, so that's right 1 down 1. And then my last one on this side is 0, 4, so that means I go right 0 and just go up 4. Now I can do it again for my next ones. 4, -4. 5, -1, and 6, 4. So when you're done, this is what you should have for your graph. Now, I hope right away you'll notice that we can't use a straight edge to connect these points. That's not going to give us a straight line. Instead, we're going to have to do our best to freehand this, because again, this is a parabola. So what I want you to do is take your pencil and put it on your vertex, and you're going to do your best to freehand the points going one way and freehand the points going the other way. Make it a nice curve. Now, notice mine kind of goes a little wonky there, so I'm going to try that one again. I want to make sure that it looks like a nice curve. And this is a graph, so we need to make sure that our graph ends outside of our grid, and we need to have arrows on it. Another thing that's important is that this is a U shape, not a V shape. This comes down here at a curve. It's not a V shape, it's a U shape. Now, like I said before, everything is centered around this vertex. This means that my graph is symmetric. And it's symmetric meaning that I could fold it in half and everything on this side of the graph would map exactly to everything on this side of the graph. Now, we can cut it in half on this vertical line or fold it in half on this vertical line, and that line is called the axis of symmetry. It is the vertical line that cuts it straight in half. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to graph that vertical line. So I need you to graph a dashed vertical line straight down the center of your parabola. And notice it will go straight through your vertex. And again, this is called the axis of symmetry. Now the axis of symmetry is a linear equation, so that means we can write the equation for it. And remember, since it's a vertical line, it's going to be x equals and whatever number it goes through on our x-axis, which is 3. So the axis of symmetry for my parabola here is x equals 3. So this is what we need to go through to graph a parabola. We have to find the vertex, make a table of values, and then we have to plot the points. Let's try it again on number 1 on the back page. So on number 1 I have x squared minus 6x plus 7. The first thing we need to do is identify our a value, b value, and c value. So a value is 1, b value is negative 6, and c value is positive 7. Now I need to take those numbers and substitute them into this formula to find the x value of my vertex. So I want the opposite of b, so my b value is negative 6, so the opposite of that is going to be positive 6, over 2 times my a value, so 2 times 1 is 2. Now, over on the left, that's where we're going to do our work. Our final answer, though, needs to go on the right. So 6 divided by 2 gives me a result of 3. Now, I need to take that 3 and substitute it back into my equation to find out what y is going to be. So, if I put that in, remember I need to put parentheses around, I'm going to have 3 squared minus 6 times 3 plus 7. And when I do that, I get back a result of negative 2. So that means that my vertex is 3, negative 2. And again, guys, this is the most important point on our graph. So that needs to go in the middle of our t-chart. Now to figure out what other points I need to count up 3, so 4, 5, and 6. And I need to count down 3, 2, 1, and 0. Now, instead of substituting all 6 of these numbers back into your calculator to get the desired results, you guys are smart enough to understand that this top one is going to be the same as this bottom one, this one's going to be the same as this one, and these two are going to be the same as well. So that being said, we really only need to pick 3 of these numbers to make sure that we put them in right. So I'm going to choose these top 3 because I feel like 0, 1, and 2 are going to be a little bit easier to work with than 4, 5, and 6. So if I substitute 0 into my equation, let's see what I get back. I'm going to get 0 squared minus 6 times 0 plus 7, which is going to give me a result of 7. Now if this guy is 7 up here, that also means down here, this guy is 7. Let's try it again for the number 1. So I'm going to hit second enter because I want my previous entry. And I want to go back, and everywhere I saw a 0, now I want to put in a 1. And that's going to give me a result of 2. Now if 1 gives me a result of 2, 5 is also going to give me a result of 2. Now let's try it one more time for the number 2. I'm going to hit second enter and get my previous entry in there. And everywhere I see a 1, I'm now going to put in a 2. And that's going to give me a result of negative 1. And if this guy is negative 1, that means this guy is also negative 1. Next, what I want to do is I want to go through and plot my points. So again, I start with my vertex because I know everything has to be centered around that. So 3, negative 2 is my vertex. 2, negative 1 is my next guy, so I'm going to go write 2, down 1. 1, 2, so write 1, up 2. And 0, 7, write 0, up 7. Now I have 4, negative 1, so write 4, down 1. 5, 2, write 5, up 2. And 6, 7, write 6, up 7. Now at this point, guys, when you're plotting your points, if they're not looking right, if they're not on the same level and something's going wrong, that's a clue that maybe some of your numbers aren't working out, and you'll need to go back and check those. So now, using your pencil, do your best effort to freehand your parabola. Finally, the last thing that you need to do is graph your axis of symmetry. Remember, the axis of symmetry is a vertical line straight down the middle of your graph. It should go right through your vertex. Then we need to write the equation. So this is going to be x equals, because it's a vertical line, and notice it goes through 3 on your x-axis. So my axis of symmetry is x equals 3. Let's try it again on number 2. On number 2, my a value in front of the x squared is negative 2. My b value is in front of the x to the first, and since you'll notice we don't have an x to the first, that means my b value is 0, and my c value is the constant at the end, so that means it's going to be 3. Now, I want you to pause the video and find the x value of your vertex on your own. So when I substitute 0 in for b, that's going to be the opposite of 0, so 0, over 2 times my a value of negative 2, which is negative 4, which is going to give me an x value of 0. Now when we substitute that back into my y value, you should get a result of positive 3. So my vertex is 0, 3. And again, that's the most important point, so it goes in the middle of my t-chart. Now I count up 3, and I count down 3. Now to find my y value, I just have to substitute them back into my original equation. However, we only have to choose one part of these to substitute in. I can either choose my negatives or I can choose my positives. Now I don't know about you, but I would much rather deal with positive numbers than I would negative numbers. So I would like you to take a second, pause the video, and substitute in your 1, 2, and 3 and get back your results. Okay, when you substitute 1 in, remember that's negative 2 times 1 in parentheses squared plus 3, which will get you a result of 1. Then when you substitute 2 in, you should get back negative 5, and 3 will give you negative 15. Now, the same thing happens for up here. If this is 1, this is 1. This is negative 5, this is negative 5. This is negative 15, this is negative 15. Now I can go through and plot my points. So I'm going to start with 0, 3, so that would be right 0, up 3. Then I have 1, 1, 2, negative 5, and 3 gives me a result of negative 15. Now if you'll notice, my graph doesn't go down to negative 15, but guys, if your graph doesn't go that far, then don't worry about that point. Go to the other points. Negative 1, 1 is my next point. Negative 2, negative 5 is my next point. And finally, negative 3, negative 15 doesn't fit on my graph, so I don't have to worry about it. Now, freehand your parabola. Finally, we want to take our straight edge and draw our axis of symmetry as a dashed vertical line straight down the center. Then we can write our equation right next to it, so it's going to be x equals, And notice it goes through 0 on my x-axis, so that's going to be x equals 0. And then, of course, we can put it over here as x equals 0. Alright, one more. On number 3, I have x squared plus 4x minus 4. So the first thing I want to do is identify my a value, which is 1, b value of 4, and c value of negative 4. Then I can take the opposite of b over 2 times a. So b is 4, so the opposite is negative 4. 2 times my a value of 1 is 2, so that gives me negative 2. And now I want to substitute it back in to get my result for y. So I'm going to have negative 2 in parentheses squared plus 4 times negative 2 minus 4. Now, if you guys did not get the result of negative 8 in your calculator, you need to make sure that you're putting parentheses around your negative numbers. Because if I didn't put parentheses around it and just said negative 2 squared plus 4 times negative 2 minus 4, that's going to give me a result of negative 16. So parentheses are very important when you're putting them back into an equation. So here, this shows us that my vertex is at negative 2, negative 8. And I can put that over here in my t-chart. And then I need to finish filling out my t-chart. Now be very careful when you're dealing with negatives. When you're going down on your graph, that's when your numbers are getting bigger. When you're going up on your graph, that's when your numbers are getting smaller. However, since these are negatives, you have to be very careful about what's bigger in terms of negative numbers and what's smaller. So if I get bigger than negative 2, I actually go up to negative 1. And bigger again gives me 0, and again gives me 1. When I'm getting smaller than negative 2, that's like negative 2 minus 1, that gives me a result of negative 3. Again is negative 4, and again is negative 5. So be very careful with your negative numbers. What I'd like you to do next is pause the video and finish number 3 all on your own.